Gloom of Kilforth by Tristan Hall. This is a game that has been in the making for a while, and when you see the game itself you'll understand why. There is an amount of original art which is mind-blowing, astounding. You have hundreds of cards, each with individual art, each representing not that a generic sword or a generic item, but that specific sword, that specific item, each piece of art telling a mini story, at least working as a potential building block for a story. Incredibly thematic art. Gameplay-wise, it is a fantasy quest game in which the players control fantasy heroes. They travel around the board and do fantasy quest stuff. They face monsters, look for treasures, collect loot, interact with people, etc, etc, etc. What they're trying to do is to collect resources and knowledge and to level up enough to be able to face the big ancient, the big baddie that shows up towards the end, and sort of like Arkham Horror style. You have to defeat that bad guy in order to win the game. In Gloom of Kilforth, the players may play cooperatively all together as a team against a group of evil villains, or they may play competitively. The game also is very friendly to the solitaire player. Now let's take a closer look at Gloom of Kilforth, and be ready to pause my video a lot. I invite you to do so that you can savor the art, because again, visually speaking, this has to be one of the most amazing games, if not the most amazing game that I've ever seen. Let's take a closer look at the game now. Like in classic RPG tradition, each character is a combination of a race and a class. Each race is represented by a card with very good art and with a male and female version of each character, which is something that I really appreciate. That's just the right thing to do in a game. And so we can have the half-demon, we can have the human, the dwarf, the vampire, and all these other archetypes of fantasy. But then after you have the race of your character, you also need a profession for the character, which may be the wizard, the priest. These cards are not double-sided. The back of these cards is all the same, so you don't have two versions like for the race. You can have the rogue, the assassin, and so on and so forth. So you can have a really nice combination of professions and classes. You may have the rogue dwarf, you may have the half-demon warrior, you may have the vampire priest. I really like that. I really like that combo. Here you have some stats that identify the abilities of the characters. So the one on top is fighting, combat, then you have study, sneak, influence, the number of health points that the character has that also indicate the number of actions that the character can take in a turn, and then characters may have abilities here. Each character also starts with some initial equipment, but each character has a destiny. Each character has... Don't forget about the broccoli for now, we'll talk about the broccoli later. Each character has a saga destiny that he or she is trying to fulfill. Each saga is represented by 3 cards, which are double-sided, and as you can see, each side has a chapter of the saga. So each player takes a set of these sagas. For example, now my vampire priest is trying to complete the Casket of Souls saga, so I take these 3 cards. Whereas the half-demon warrior is trying to take the fortress, and the half-orc rogue he's dealing with the trap godhead, and so on and so forth. So you have a bunch of these things here. Basically, what happens during the game is that you're trying to complete the chapters of your saga by collecting the keywords that are necessary to advance. So I need to collect cards and or game effects that give me, for example, to advance in this chapter here, a forest, a place, and a spell. Spell if I have 1 or 2 players. I also need to spend an action and 5 gold. If I have all of these things, then I can level up and I can advance in my saga. And now I'm collecting more keywords and more gold, and I need to spend more actions to advance, and so on and so forth. You can do it like this. Towards the end, you will gain a nice totem. Maybe I will not give you too many spoilers, but you collect the powerful artifacts. And at the end, When the first player that gets to complete their saga will unlock one of the ancients, one of the big bad guys. Each comes with a scary card, such as this one, with some abilities. Each also comes with a card that gives you some special skills, abilities, things that they do. We have the Marquis of Pain, the Prince of Ruin. These are pretty impressive. They also in tone, they tend to be much more well, towards horror than other aspects of the game, which feels more like high fantasy inspired by pre-Raphaelite painting and romantic painting. Romantic, of course, I'm talking about German romanticism, such as in this card here, which seems like out of a German painting from the 19th century. Not talking about romanticism as in like, oh, well, you know, box of chocolates, a bunch of roses, that kind of thing. This is the play area. You have a card in there representing a city, then you have the cards represent different locations. You shuffle them together and you place them randomly in a grid such as this one. So this is really nice because you have a different landscape each time. There are different types of landscape as indicated by the symbols there. You have the plains, you have the badlands, the mountains, and the forest. And also you have corresponding decks of event cards that you use to draw events that you will face when you're traveling the land. These cards are double-sided. One is the, let's call it the healthy side of the card, and this is the healthy side, but then as the game progresses you will also flip these cards face down, and this is the gloom side. See the difference? I don't. I barely do. The back it looks almost the same. It's just a little darker. The contrasts are a little less pronounced, but in some cases it's more evidence, the back and the front. In other cases the back and the front really look very similar to one another, and as I am playing the game I shouldn't have to worry too much about that. It should be a little more evident. I understand that the idea was to keep the color palette in the player consistent and the effect is very aesthetically pleasing, but I should be able to identify the healthy areas with the gloomy areas a little more easily. Really the only thing that stands out but for the difference in color palette is this small symbol here, this microscopic symbol here, which means that if you end a turn on one of those cards you're going to lose a health point. You may want to repurpose tokens maybe from other games to mark the cards that have fallen on the dark side. Now, during the game, as I said, you will have your culture that is defined by a race and a profession, but you will also collect spells and items and allies and titles. These are all rewards that will give you, well, a bunch of advantages. I'll just go sort of like almost randomly here to show you some of these things that you may acquire. Feel free to pause if you want to see more detail. The art is astounding. I also want to give you a chance of having a look at that. So if you pause, you can enjoy the art while also seeing what the ludic possibilities offered by the cards are. As you can imagine, these items, allies, and other things will give you the benefit described in the text and or modifications to your values. I could go on for a long time. I'm almost tempted to go through the entire darn deck because this art is so detailed and colorful and atmospheric and absolutely attractive. Really impressive. This game, and I'll probably say it later in my conclusions, is definitely the game with the best art that I own in my collection. There's no other game that even comes close to have so much good art in it. Okay, that should have given you sort of like a general sense of what the rewards are. The rewards also have keywords, and keywords again are very important because keywords are what drives the design. Again, you're on a quest to complete your mission, and as we said, you have to collect keywords. In a nutshell, the way it works is that you spend actions to travel around. You will have encounters that will come out of the deck that corresponds to the location in which we are, forest for forest, mountains for mountains, and so on. And then you will encounter that card. The nature of the card may change, but still there is a general idea that is, you take a test to defeat the card. Sometimes just a place and interact with the place. Sometimes it's a quest or the types of interactions. Sometimes it's a monster, an enemy that you have to fight. But the idea basically is the same. That is, you draw a card. If you spend an action to look for encounters, to look for trouble in the location in which you are, you draw a card and you place the card there, and then you may interact with that location, enemy, whatever it is that you found. But again, the idea is always the same. That is, you choose one of the attributes of the event, and not all events have the same ones, and then you roll as many dice as you're able to produce using your skill, your skills, your race, your class, objects that you collect, and so on and so forth. For example, if right now she was to take a test in influence, she would have 6, power of 6. And again, a myriad of effects can change that. You roll dice. You roll dice for each point that you have. So I would roll 6 dice here, and you score a success for each 5 or 6 that you roll. Beautiful. No successes whatsoever. You also have fate tokens that you can spend to get an extra success. Again, there are other game effects that manipulate this. And luckily enough, if you do not gain enough successes, the number of successes that you need is indicated on the card itself. If you do not get enough successes to defeat the card, at least you can use tokens to keep track of how many you got, because you can save them and you can add more, spending extra actions. So you go to a place and you spend actions and actions and actions. This is the basic idea. In combat, it's a little trickier because there is an extra element that is first surprise. Characters may or may not have surprise. There's an action that you may take which gives you, that allows you to hide, and that is when the broccoli come into place, because it's well known, if you're just minding your business and eating broccoli, you're psychologically invisible to the enemies. That probably means bushes and you're hiding in the bushes, but I like the broccoli image much better. And what do we know? That in Kilforth, broccolis do not give you invisibility. What do we know about the vegetation there? So, during an encounter with a monster, one of the characters may have surprise. You may have it if you are hidden. The monster may have it if the monster comes peekaboo out of the deck. Either way, that simply gives you an advantage during the first round of combat. The players will still roll against the monster. You will roll in combat, and the number of successes that you have is the number of wounds that you inflict on the opponent, and that is reduced from their health points. The same applies to them. They are rolling dice against you, and the successes that they score will result in wounds that are subtracted from your health points. Having a surprise simply gives you an extra die during the first round of combat. But again, it's pretty much basic. I mean, the rulebook has a lot of exceptions and subcategories, but the idea is go around, spend actions, roll a ton of dice to pass tests, and then to pass more tests, and then to try to pass more tests, and then there will be a test, and you will roll dice, and then you'll be allowed to take a test that will make you roll dice. There are a couple of other actions, like you can rest, you can go to the market and stuff like that. But these are really the main ideas. Oh, actually, there may be obstacles on the board that are represented by these cute little clouds, and you can spend actions to remove them. Something very important, however, when you do defeat an encounter, then you get a reward, and that is really important because, again, you're looking for loot and rumors. Loot because it's good stuff, and rumor because rumor is what gives you keywords. When you claim a reward from a defeated encounter, first you may either take the gold that there is there or draw a random loot counters from this bag. It's a fairly small bag. My hand barely fits, and it's like chock full. It's full up to here of tokens, so there isn't really. It's not really easy to shuffle tokens in there. So you get money or a loot, and the random token can be anything. Can be gold even. Can be magic objects, other advantages, cloak of invisibility. There's a ton of stuff in there. Good, because there's variety and theme that comes on there. Then you also gain a rumor, which means you can take the defeating counter and place it in your hand as a rumor, not as a result keyword yet, or discard the defeated encounter and get one of those reward cards that we mentioned before. Again, what happens here is that once you have that card in your hand, whether it is from a reward deck or it is the event itself that you got, it is in your hand, but it's not a keyword yet. You have to then go to the place indicated on the card, spend an action to discard it, and then from your hand you place it into your play area where you're collecting your rumors that have become, I guess, information that become keywords, and that is how you get keywords. You defeat encounters that turn into rumors, you go to a location where you turn the rumor into a valid keyword. Once you have all the cards with the right keywords and 5 coins, you go, you can complete a chapter, and then you continue like this until, again, you win or you lose the game. But as you do all of these things, the bad guys are not just napping around. Again, they are spreading evilness, and that occurs through the night deck at the end of each day. Basically, each turn is a day. Each player takes a turn, spending their actions moving around, clearing obstacles, finding stuff, fighting, etc., etc., etc. At the end, you have a night event that will indicate an area of the board that becomes gloomy. Again, here I'm giving a little bit of eye candy, so feel free to just enjoy the beauty of the art and or stop to read the effects and the events. But through these cards, bad stuff will happen, more enemies will be added to the board, cards will fall into gloom, and so on and so forth. And you continue like this until the end of the game, which occurs at the end of the 25th day or turn. At the end of the 25th day or turn in the game, you determine whether players have won or lost. In the competitive game, if a hero defeated an ancient before the time ran out, then the player wins the game. Otherwise, if no one defeated ancients, then the winner is the player that collected the most victory points, which is through experience and looting things, which of course also makes, in a competitive game, the idea of killing the ancient not as much of a priority. In the cooperative and solo games, in order to win the game, you need to defeat all of the ancients, again, before the time runs out. I am a happily married man, but if I was single right now, probably I would post something on Facebook along the lines of, I hope to find someone who loves me like Tristan Hall loves Gloom or Kilforth. Because there's so much love in this game. This has to be the most loved game that I've ever seen. I don't know that there are many other games that exude so much love that clearly the designer has poured into the game. The amount of art, the quality of the art, the detail of the art is astounding. This is the game that, from the point of view of the art, is the most attractive that I own, bar none. It's just unbelievable. It's also great that we can play with these components. We don't just look at those cards, although again, they're so attractive that I would probably just be happy if they were trade cards just for artistic purposes. But talking about the game, those cards have that astounding art, but of course they also use as components. And while they are spectacular as works of art, there are a couple of minor complaints that I have about their functionality in the game. And some I already mentioned, like the fact that the back of the cards is a little of the terrain, of the territory is a little too similar to the front. That makes the color palette still look very balanced and nice, but does not help with gameplay. Some of those wooden pieces that clearly like a Euro game wooden pieces, they don't really mesh very well with the overall idea, with the overall tone of the board. Some of those are coded only by color, not by shape, so they're not particularly friendly to the colorblind or people that in any case have any challenge about color recognition. They're just things of this type. The rulebook, I didn't find it all that friendly. I didn't find it all that easy to navigate the rulebook, but it's doable, especially once you realize that the game at the core is very simple, and then it has a lot of special categories to face individual situations, some of which you may not encounter very often or very early in the game, so you can kind of like breeze through the rulebook, start with the idea of moving, encountering stuff, and then you go in and try to retrieve information that applies to specific situations. As for gameplay also, I expected that I would be desperately in love with this game, because to me the potential for a very immersive fantasy adventure, for a sort of like a teleportation device that beamed into the fantasy world, the potential seems to be immense. And so I'm not sure, I'm trying to articulate it here, why I did not enjoy it more than I did. I enjoyed it to an extent, but I didn't fall in love with the design. And who knows, maybe if the art was attractive, I would be like, oh, this is such a good game, you know, you go around and you kill monsters, etc., etc. Maybe the art caused all my expectations to be so high, and gameplay, which is solid but unexceptional in my opinion, then seemed to be disappointing in comparison. But in truth, it's gameplay just, again, is solid but unexceptional. That's kind of like my assessment in a nutshell. It has something that has a nostalgia value, but the nostalgia is tricky because, of course, between nostalgia and dated, there is such a blurry division. It really, of all games that I can think of, reminds me of Talisman more than anything. And I hope that actually it would remind me of Runebound, which is a game that I like very much, which relies on a similar idea. You're traveling around, you hear about things that may happen, you go to certain locations to fulfill quests, etc., etc., etc. But I found Runebound to be no more complex than Gloom or Kilforth, but much more thematically sophisticated. The combat system of Runebound is very fun because you're using different pools of runes that do different things. There is a certain tactical depth together with the strategic depth. Here somehow I didn't find really that combination between strategic and tactical. It almost felt like it was somewhere in between all the time, like operational level. And I just found maybe what to me prevented the game from feeling very thematic and very engaging was the fact that you have a lot of randomness. You have randomness from the cards and randomness from the dice, to the point that somehow, again, you feel like only your power of action, which is there, you're budgeting your actions, etc., etc., feels a little limited. And at the end, your power of agency, your agency in the game, feels a little almost abstract, because it's about budgeting actions and timing them well and chaining them, sequencing them well. It almost felt, to an extent, almost if the gameplay was almost like a fairly simple Eurogame gameplay, just under a pile of thematic chrome, flavor, and detail, which could be good, but somehow to me the two things did not go well, did not go together very well. They didn't really coalesce into an organic whole. It felt like I had all the randomness of an Ameritrash game, with around the score of Eurogamey, very basic mechanics, and of course all the special cases and special exceptions and exceptions to those exceptions that you expect in thematic games. I don't know, that's my impression, that the thematic element and the mechanical element did not go together very well. I didn't feel that the theme was blossoming from the mechanics and mixing with the theme and with the theme of the art and the components into something that was more than the sum of the parts. I felt that the mechanics were a little too abstract, and that was not enough to bring to life the theme that the components could potentially create. This being said, clearly a game, even a game that has a strong story, unless the game starts talking, doesn't give you the whole story. And if the game started talking, then it's simply a narrative that you can find in a book or in a movie. A game that tells a story is really a game that lets you co-tell a story with it. It's a game that gives you the dots and then you connect them into a design, gives you the building blocks, and then you put them together into a story. And this game does that to an extent, but again, to an extent, not the extent that I find in Mage Knight or Runebound or Middle-earth Quest, but in the way that I find in Talisman, which to me, again, it's a little too... how can I say? The connections feel a little loose, again, precisely because the theme to me is mainly in the art and the components rather than the mechanics. Then I have to fill in the gaps, then I have to make all of these connections. And again, to an extent, you always have to do it, as I said before. You have to do it with Runebound, you have to do it with Middle-earth Quest, and so on and so forth. It just felt to me that you have to do some extra work here. You have to really put the story in the components. In other games, again, mechanics and components were together, and I do feel that the game and I are working together to tell a story. Here I almost feel like the game is really giving me a fairly, I don't know, busy but very loose framework, and I have to create my own story. Sometimes, I don't know, I have an encounter with some enemies and I defeat the encounter using sneak, so I imagine I just avoided the opponent. So how come that now has become a rumor? How did I get rumors if I didn't see the opponents? Then I have to imagine, well, but maybe it was sneaking because I disguised myself as one of the opponents. I traveled with them for a while. I didn't realize that I wasn't one of them. I heard that rumor and then I left them, so I didn't have to take any negative consequence, and now I have discarded the proofs I picked up a rumor from them. You see, it's a lot of work that you have to put in there. So, it can work. I think that actually probably this game will work more than in any other situation, may work as a solitaire game. You set it up there by yourself and you kind of like take it as it comes. Yes, you will have your algorithms. Yes, you will have your strategies that will improve over time. But ultimately, there's so much randomness here that part of the experience will be, once you figure out sort of like the basic strategies, implementing those strategies, reacting to all the stuff that the board and the dice throw at you, which is a lot, and then simply putting together those bits and pieces into an organic narrative. Then if you're willing to put that narrative work in the design, then I believe that at the end you'll be able to remember gameplay as a saga, as an epic story, etc, etc, etc. But to me, and that's my complaining, the story somehow did not emerge from mechanics and components. The potential was there in the components, the mechanics were too simple, too dry in their basic core, and then somewhat a little too fiddly when it came to the special cases to really work well with the theme and to create a strong organic story. So, Gloom of Kilforth, components-wise, from an artistic point of view, A+++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++++ view of components as elements of the design, as moving parts of the engine of gameplay, A/A-, not a full A. For gameplay itself, to me, is an A-, if not a B+. I did not enjoy it. I'm afraid that this is going to sound more negative than it is. It's not that I hated it. It's not that I disliked it. It's just that I was a little lukewarm. I enjoyed it. I don't feel particular desire of, play it once every week to see what are the stories it has to tell me, because I felt that I was doing most of the work anyways. I found it underwhelming. And again, part of this may be because of the expectations that the art created, but to me, objectively, this just feels like a slightly freer version of Talisman, where you have more freedom of movement, but you do not have much more freedom of action. You do not have much more strategy than in Talisman, and to me this is the closest resemblance I can think of. If you enjoy Talisman, then you have a variant that gives you a little more flexibility, especially when it comes to movement, but still is about see what the game throws at you, turn it into a theme in your head, going from one place to another, collecting stuff until you have enough stuff to move on, etc, etc, etc. It's Talisman for the 21st century with much prettier production values. But other than that, it's a little too similar to Talisman to really become like an astounding game. I hope that this game would send all of my other Fantasy Quest games to retirement. Metaphorically does so for the art, because this is just so above all the other games, but I'm gonna keep my Middle-earth Quest, I'm gonna keep my Runebound, because this is not a strong competitor against them, in my opinion, when it comes to Fantasy Quest games.